Right boys, do you want to learn how to mate with two bishops? Well, today I'm going to show you how. In my new series, I'm going to call it Tutorial Tuesdays. That's what I've decided. So instead of Title Tuesday, we've got Tutorial Tuesday. So, how are we actually going to mate the Black King? Well, what we need to do is force the Black King into one of the corners of the board. Any corner will do, it doesn't really matter, as we have the bishop pair. It's a lot different to when we have a bishop and knight, because whatever the colour the bishop is, that's the square we need to force the king to. But the job's a lot easier when we have both the bishops. So, one thing I want you to understand is that we can't mate the Black King without using our own king. So first, I want you to bring the king forward to block off some of the squares, which eventually we'll need to block. That's the first rule, is that we have to use our king. And I don't want you to be lazy and just try and mate with the bishops. We have to use our king. It's basically impossible to mate the Black King without using our own. The next rule that I already want to share with you is that I want you to imagine a box around the king. You might have heard of this for the rook and the queen mate if you've learned how to do those, but if not, a box around the king is basically saying which squares we control, forcing the king into the box. So, I'll draw it on the board now. These are the squares that we control with our bishops. The squares that the Black King can move to is the box. That's the space that Black can move to. So what we need to do is slowly but surely whittle down the amount of squares that Black can move to. So I think it's entirely logical for Black to want to stay in the centre of the board and the furthest point away from these corners. So let's say he goes to e3. What are we going to do? Well, it's the same as before really. We brought our king in before and we need to get him a little bit closer. We're simply going to push our king to f5. Now, if we draw the box, we're covering all of these squares and this one. And the box has been reduced by one square. Now, instead of Black having 12 squares to move to, he only has 11. And we can whittle this down further and further with every move. Where's Black going to go next? Remember, eventually we're trying to push the king to the second rank, and then the back rank. And then, once we've got the king on the back rank, we're trying to force him to the corner. So if the king goes to f2, he's made our job very, very easy. We're going to simply bring our king in and block off all of these squares, as well as these squares already being blocked off by our bishops. And as you can see, the Black is forced to move to the back rank. Now, Black made our job a little bit easy there. So we're going to say that he goes to e2. And don't worry, I'm going to explain how to push the king to the corner later in the video. The Black King is now on e2. What are we going to do? Because bringing our king in or closer to the middle doesn't really help. It kind of just stays on the second rank, right? We've not really blocked off many more squares. If a king move isn't going to help us, what we need to do is use our bishops. I want you to visualize something again. This light squared bishop now cuts off these squares, and this dark squared bishop cuts off these squares. But as you can see, there's a better diagonal that our bishop can be on. Our dark squared bishop can move to d4 and cover these squares. This then traps the Black King into an even smaller box. That's 8 squares that the Black King can move to now. We've took control of these 3. Black is already struggling for moves, but he wants to stay close to the centre and far away from the corner. So he stays on this second rank and goes to d2. What are we going to do? Well, I hope you realise that no king move is going to help us. Wherever we move this king, let's say to b3, the Black King is simply going to move forward and come closer to the centre. And we're kind of back where we started. Now that we know that king b3 is not the right move, what else can we do? Well, I hope you realise that it's a bishop move. Our dark squared bishop is doing a great job at blocking in this king. And these are the squares that you need to highlight. But what about our light squared bishop? How much better can he be doing? As you can see, there's 3 squares that just don't matter. The Black King will never get to those squares. But what we can do is move our bishop here and cover these 2 squares. Now, boxing in the king even more. I want to note that the Black King technically can go this way, but that is the back rank and will force him to the corner swiftly. But he still stays on the second rank. So what do we do now? After giving it a little bit of thought, I hope you realise once again that moving my king is not going to help. Moving this bishop is not going to help. So it must be a move with the dark squared bishop. And I would like to point out that there's many ways of winning here. The most accurate or the shortest amount of moves is bishop f6, as this instantly forces the king to the first rank. But you don't have to play this way. There's a lot of ways where you can mate with the 2 bishops and you don't have to play these computer moves. So I want to give you principled advice on how to easily checkmate with these bishops. So what I suggest is bishop e3. This then covers this diagonal. And look at all these squares now that we cover. I'm highlighting the ones down there, but they don't really matter. Technically, this black king is in a box of about 5 squares, and we're kind of already forcing the black king to the corner without even getting him to the first rank. It's impossible for me to highlight every single position and every single move that you should do, which is why I believe it's important to learn the principles of how to mate with the 2 bishops. And the main component of that is shortening that box and making it smaller and making it more difficult for black to stay in the center. King goes to b2 because he wants to stay close to the center, away from that back rank, even though we're secretly already tricking him into going towards that corner. Now, what's the move? I hope you recognise a pattern here, that it's not a king move. Our king is doing a beautiful job here on c4. We can leave him there. And this bishop has just been moved to block off the king. So, it must be the light squared bishop's turn. As I've already said before, there's many ways that we can win this position. But what we want to focus on is minimising the amount of squares that the black king can go to, aka making the box a bit smaller. Let's just highlight again, once more, what squares we control. And as you can see, you might be thinking that the king is going to run to a3 and he's going to run and escape. No, this isn't true. Because once the king goes to a3, you have to realise he's on the back rank. It doesn't matter which orientation of the board that we're playing on, whether it's this rank, this rank, this rank, this rank, it's all the back rank. And that's what we have to remember. If he goes to a3, we've succeeded in our second step of forcing the black king to the back rank. So now, I hope you've noticed the pattern. The king is perfectly placed here on f5, and we're not going to move him. We've just moved the dark squared bishop to cover these diagonals. We're not going to move him. Now it's time to get the light squared bishop into the game. I believe the most accurate move is bishop e8, because this covers these squares and makes it even harder for the black king to escape. But I'm going to offer a bit of a simpler solution, and I'm going to say that the principles again, we're going to go to bishop e4. It just blocks off the squares slowly but surely. This move also forces the black king to the back rank, whether it's a1 or a2 or a3. The black king will be in the back rank. One thing I'd like to point out is that you have 50 moves to mate the black king. You don't need to rush. Whether bishop e8 is more accurate because you're going to get to mate one move earlier, you don't need to worry about that. You have 50 moves to figure it out and remember the principles that I've shared in today's video. Black is struggling for moves, but he knows that going to the corner is the worst possible thing for him. Well, king a3 makes sense, right? But what we're going to do is make black's life miserable. We're going to simply move our bishop close to the center to cover this square. And as you can see, we've now cut off another diagonal, so that the king is no longer ever going to be able to escape that back rank. We've sort of made this blockade where he can only move through these squares now. We have a similar sort of thing with the box on the back rank, where the black king can only move to these squares. So what we need to do is slowly move him towards that corner and make that box 1 before we eventually checkmate him. Now again, black knows not to go anywhere near that corner, so he's going to move to a4, to which we have to block this square to stop him escaping. Bishop c3 or bishop b6, don't really matter. We'll go bishop c3 because it's closer to this corner. So when king's only move is to go to a3, we now need to think about how we're going to block this square. Bishop c2, why not? Now look at this box. It's getting very tight. The king is suffocated, but we have a problem. When the king goes to a2, it's a forced move. You have to be sure that you're not going to stalemate the black king. For example, as you can see, the eval's just dropped. King to b4 stalemates the king because you made the box way too small. Instead, what I'm going to suggest to you now is a little long-winded route on how to mate the black king. Look at the box that we've created. Now what we need to do is get control of this a3 square without losing control of the b2 square. And how are we going to do this? Well, it's quite simple really. What we're going to do is bring our king in, because as we know from our box, the black king is suffocated between these two squares. He can only move back and forth between a2 and a3. So once the king goes to a3, we slowly just bring our king round until eventually we get into this position. You might realise all of these squares are still being controlled, but this time, once the king is on a2, we can move our bishop here to cover a3, forcing the black king into the corner. Now, here's one more thing you need to be aware of. Sometimes we need to waste a move. For example, to make progress in this position, we need the king on a2, but it's currently on a3. So how do we do this? Well, we can't make a king move because once we go here, the king's back on a2 and oh, we're not on a3. So we know it's not a king move, so which one of our bishops should we move? Now, I have to be honest, you can move either. So if we move our light squared bishop, we want to stay controlling on these two squares, meaning our only move is this. Now this might be easy to remember because there's only one possible square that your bishop can move to. When the king goes to a2, we can then move our bishop here and cover this square. The king is forced between the corner and a2. This is the prime position on how we're going to checkmate the black king. I would just like to point out that earlier you could have moved the dark squared bishop here, and when the king went to b1, you can then go to b4. Once we're in this position, what are we going to do? Well, the black king is forced to the corner. Now, I don't want you to rush the position. If you block this square straight away by going to b3, again, it is stalemate, and we do not want to stalemate the black king. We have a free point here. So, what are we going to do? What if I taught you? You've got to bring your king in, you've got to force the black king to the back rank, and then sometimes you need to waste a move. Which one of these things do you think we need to do now? Well, hopefully you realise that no king move is going to help us. The king is already on the back rank, so we have to waste a move. And we have to think about how we're going to control this light square. You might think it's scary moving the bishop all the way back here when we're trying to mate the black king. But this move and any move on this diagonal is in fact mate in two. Because our king controls these squares and the black king cannot escape on this b3 square. So when the black king's forced to a2, we're simply going to check the black king. He's then forced into the corner and we can mate him here. I would like to quickly mention that I made it a little bit more difficult for no reason, that you can just move this bishop anywhere, but that's true. You can move the bishop any square. That's my guide on how to mate with two bishops. Now, there's 4 key concepts that you need to remember from this video. Number 1, you need to use your own king and bring your own king in to mate the black king. Number 2, you need to make the box around the black king as small as possible and force the black king to the back rank. Number 3, you don't need to be scared of the 50 move rule. You don't need to be super accurate. You can easily make this black king in 50 moves. Even if you go wrong a couple times, you still manage to do it in under 50 moves. Number 4, be careful about stalemating the black king. Before you make a move, think, where is the black king going to go and how big's the box? You should always leave the box to be at least 2 squares big. You do not want to risk stalemating the black king. And lastly, the 5th rule that you need to remember is sometimes we have to waste a move to mate the black king. Don't be scared to waste that move. Sometimes you just need to wait to get the king on the right square. I hope this video helped, and if there's any questions, please comment them down below, and I'll reply as fast as I can.